You're just trying to read, but I'm always standing in your light. Pop punk is a genre that I have a lot of love for. A lot of my favorite albums fall into this style, but if I'm being honest, finding a pop punk album I love is not common. Sure, I haven't heard everything, but a lot of the time I hear an album and go, that was alright. Then I never listen to it again. But every so often something comes along and hits that sweet spot. I mean, there's nothing quite like a pop punk song that just hits. And recently, a band called The Wonder Years did that for me. Their album The Greatest Generation took me by surprise and blew me away. It was exciting to once again hear an album in this genre that just clicked. So I wanted to talk about it. This is how The Wonder Years made a pop punk classic. The band formed in 2005 in Philadelphia and began by putting out very goofy and obnoxious music across some singles and even a debut album called Get Stoked on It. It's described as easycore, which is basically pop punk with screamed breakdowns, and that's exactly what this album is. It's pretty bad, but the band was clearly not serious at the time. I mean, there are literally songs called Key State Dude Core and About to Get Fruit Punched, Homie. Oh, and that album art. Horrendous. The band has disowned this era for a good reason, but I could easily understand why someone might have nostalgia for it. The Wonder Years truly started in 2010 with The Upsides. It's an alright album to me. It has some really catchy tracks, but it's not one I come back to in full. But the very next year they released Suburbia, I've Given You All, and Now I'm Nothing. And this thing is great. So many anthemic, emotive tracks focus on adolescence and suburban life, as if the title didn't give that away. Sure, not every song is a slapper, but man, this is some good pop punk. Soaring choruses, huge gang vocals, great riffs, it's all here. Songs like Came Out Swinging and The Closer are some of my favorites from the Wonder Years. It was also the first album I checked out from them, and I was actually lukewarm on it at first, but it grew on me pretty quick, and I can confidently say that it's one of the better pop punk records out there. However, despite the clear emotional maturity shown on Suburbia, the band had a bit more growing up to do. Which brings us to their magnum opus, The Greatest Generation.
See, people say the greatest generation is come and gone, but they're wrong. They haven't seen what we're capable of.
The album began production around early 2013 and was recorded in a small, dingy apartment that was falling apart, which I'm honestly not shocked by, as this record is pretty deep into its feelings. In the album's trailer, Soupy said that their previous works were about battles with things like depression, and that this one was about trying to grow past those things and learn from them. The title was of course taken from the term used to describe the generation that fought in World War II. This name wasn't chosen for no reason though. Many songs on the album make direct references to that time period and generations past, whether it's a line about not having the guts for war, or one about the brand of cigarettes your grandma smoked. These things are not a focal point, but it creates an interesting feel when listening, at least for me. The Greatest Generation was released on May 14th, 2013, and it ended up doing very well, both critically and commercially. It's also a huge fan favorite, with most calling it their best work. The band felt pretty proud of it as well, and played many shows in support of it. In 2014, they embarked on a few headlining tours with support from bands like Citizen, The Story So Far, and even Modern Baseball, a band who garnered their very own cult following. Now, I had heard a track from this album long before I heard the entire thing, that being Passing Through a Screen Door. I thought it was good. It was definitely emotive, so I went into this album expecting a series of hyper-emotional rock songs that would eventually fatigue me. Keep in mind, this was a couple days after I listened to Suburbia, so I wasn't expecting a masterpiece. But I pressed play and was of course met with the intro track, There There. It kicks off with some subdued vocals and a lightly strummed guitar, and I'm like, okay, cool. But then this riff kicks in, and my eyes lit up. I was hooked by it, but after another verse, Dan passionately shouts out the line, "I'm sorry I didn't laugh at the right times," and that same riff explodes. The track just erupts with emotion, and I was absolutely blown away. It's one of, if not my favorite track on the album. Lyrically, it describes the feeling of awkwardness and anxiety, but I found this one comment on Genius to be interesting. Their interpretation is that of a soldier coming home with PTSD, which I find even more compelling. It makes lyrics like "I know how it seems when I'm always staring off into nothing, I'm lost in my head again" sting a bit more. Obviously the social awkwardness angle makes more sense, but this is still interesting. Afterwards we move right into the second track, Passing Through a Screen Door. It's the most popular song on the album, and it's quite the powerhouse. The track is incredibly cynical, with Soupy describing his negative outlook, as well as regret for not doing more with his life. He wishes he settled down, but also doesn't want a possible child of his to go through the same depression he has. Despite these themes, however, the song still explodes with energy and feels anthemic. I'd say this track is a fantastic display of Soupy's skill as a vocalist. Hell, I'd even say it's his best performance. The amount of conviction present in his singing is incredible. He sounds distressed but not obnoxious. He sounds aggressive but not overbearing. But when that bridge comes in, oh man, you can just feel how fed up he is. He really sells the song, making you feel every line. Though I do wonder what Soupy thinks of this song now that almost a decade has passed and having had a child. Regardless, the band continues to play it live, as it is a fan favorite for good reason. We Could Die Like This features Soupy reminiscing about his hometown in a somewhat nostalgic way. He lists small memories he has in the verses, and the chorus reveals that if he were to die, he wouldn't mind it happening in the place he grew up. It's a great track that keeps up the energy the first two songs brought, with a killer hook and melodic guitar leads. You can really get whipped up in the performance towards the end. It's a great moment, but what follows is one of my favorite tracks on the album, Dismantling Summer. This song is incredible. On first listen I was already enamored with the previous tracks, but when the chorus of this one hit, holy shit, I got so excited. I was so glad to hear something in this genre that hit perfectly after months of, well, not. The structure and buildup of this hook is just perfect, and it honestly put a grin on my face, which is ironic since this song is pretty sad. The chorus has the line, "I hadn't seen a heart break until now," and before I looked into it, I assumed it was alluding to a relationship. But this album actually barely touches on romance, so the heartbreak is literal. The song was written after Soupy's grandfather suffered a heart attack, hence the references to hospitals, as well as the incredible refrain. It's such a cutting moment, and I love the climax of it where the vocals just soar. Fantastic song. We then get The Bastards, The Vultures, The Wolves. It's one of the more intense and fast-paced tracks on the album, with its speedy riffs and super tight drumming. There's even this drum fill moment that I enjoy a lot. The lyrics are pretty confrontational, and Soupy comes through with some more aggressive inflections to fit the high intensity. It's yet another exciting moment on the album, ending off with a wall of guitar noise that gives way to a final vocal line. But then the band slows things down with The Devil in My Bloodstream. The track begins as a simple piano ballad, which I was dismissive of at first. I thought they dropped the ball, and I found the female vocals a bit corny. But this part of the song has grown on me. It's very melodic, it's very dramatic, but it makes for a good build up to when Soupy unleashes vocally and the song turns full pop punk. This part of the track grabbed me immediately, but I've come to enjoy the contrast the song has. The melody from the first half is even repurposed, and it makes for a killer chorus, backed up by some harmonious background vocals. The next few tracks are pretty straightforward, but they're still great. Teenage Parents almost has a suburbia vibe to it, and has some interesting lyrics detailing things related to Soupy's past and family. Chaser, while not my favorite on the album, is still really enjoyable, especially with the bombastic outro. It's not a track I get much from lyrically, but it's still fun. Same with An American Religion, not the most substantive track, but the chorus is tight and passionate like any other on the album, simple as that. However, I really love Rain Dance in Traffic. Sure, it might feel typical of the album at this point, but the chorus is so massive and anthemic that it can't be denied. The short build-up is really nice, and the huge backing vocals and riffs just make the song explode. There's so much conviction in Soupy's voice too, both in the chorus as well as the bridge. The song just rips, and it's honestly one of my favorites here. It may be a song about anxiety and such, but it sure makes me happy. but really this whole album is like that. It presents these very sad themes in a very amped way. I can enjoy its anthemics, but at the same time I feel the emotional weight because of it. It really does work both ways. Although right after we get Not That, I do not like the song Madeline. Granted, I almost never enjoy bare acoustic songs, so I already have that bias, but I still don't like the track. Soupy's singing is really annoying for one, and the whole thing sounds like a demo. It's as if they recorded on the fly and tried to touch it up in post. And the chimes in the background? Just stop. It was saccharine enough. Though the lyrics are fine. It sees Soupy reaching out to a girl struggling with alcoholism. It's sad and poetic, but the issues I listed above make it a pretty instant skip for me. I don't like it at all. But the band picks up the pace once again with the song Cul-de-sac, which details a dying friendship, something that would be the entire focus of their next album, No Closer to Heaven. It's yet another great track with more soaring vocals and great lyrics. Lines like, "I thought my kids would call you uncle," are pretty cutting, and I like how Soupy describes fond memories he had with this ex-friend. It paints a better picture since you can really tell he didn't want to let this person go. We then get the final track on this album, I Just Want to Sell Out My Funeral. Now this is how you close out an album. We get a mild intro that gives way to some guitar chords burning out underneath the chorus. Of course, it feels a bit triumphant in the face of all the hardships discussed prior. This line and the song's title were taken from something Soupy said in a tweet years ago. "I only met my grandfather once, but yesterday he sold out his funeral. Must have been a great man." Soupy just wants to be remembered and loved by the people around him. There's still a hint of sadness to it, but I think it's cool that the album ends off with this sentiment. However, the bulk of the track is made up of a reprise of all of the mantras and refrains from the previous songs. Some may see this as lazy, but I think it's a cool credits roll moment, and it's very emotive. But at the very end, we get a new verse. Part of it reads, "We all want to be great men, and there's nothing romantic about it. I just want to know that I did all I could with what I was given." It's a bit of a downer, but having it be the last thing said on this album makes it hit pretty hard. It's an incredible way to close things out. This album really is incredible. I don't think it transcends pop punk as a genre, but it nearly rivals some of the best within it. Its harrowing anthemics can come closer to the likes of the Black Parade. I mean, the Black Parade is literally perfect, but what the Wonder Years crafted here should not be underestimated. This is some of the best writing I've ever heard on a pop punk album, and even though I didn't mention the instrumentation as much, it creates a perfect backdrop for these emotional outbursts. The fast drums and melodic guitars are always great on this album. Sure, no riff sticks out quite like the one on There, but they don't always have to. Soupy does more than enough to sell these songs and make them as emotive as possible. A lot of the tracks may sound a bit similar, but the band plays this music with so much force and passion that I don't even care. Everything on this album works in its favor to create a throttling, anthemic, and cutting experience. So many lines have stuck out to me pretty quick, and the overt references to war, the early 1900s, and generations past make for an interesting point of reference. I absolutely love The Greatest Hit Generation, and I'm very glad I finally listened to it. But was this album ever topped? No! Their follow-up, No Closer to Heaven, is nowhere near as good. It's certainly decent and has some incredible tracks like Cardinals, but there are some moments that leave me confused, like the Jason Butler feature on Stained Glass Ceilings. Then we have their 2018 album Sister Cities, which is one I do not like. They stripped away pop punk, but instead delivered very frail emo music. Granted, I enjoy the more dynamic song structures, but the bland instrumentation and overly blemished singing make this pretty unenjoyable to me. Their new album is slated to release pretty soon, and I do hope the band can improve from Sister Cities. Even Mark Hoppus said it was good, and he never did anything wrong. Absolutely nothing. Sadly, the band has seemingly lost contemporary relevance in recent years. People still come to their shows, of course, and one look at r/poppunkers will tell you that people still care about them. They came up in a time where this type of music was making a heavy resurgence in the underground. Bands like The Story So Far, Neck Deep, and Modern Baseball made a huge impact. This music was angsty, energetic, heartfelt, and youthful to the core, so of course teens and young adults took to it. People grew up on this stuff. People grew up with the Wonder Years. and I do hope the band is very proud of the impact they've made. But before I close out, I want to bring up something I found online. So there's this user-based music review site called Listened. It's pretty much dead, but for some reason it was the first site of its kind I came across. Not album of the year, not rate your music, this. But hey, it had a pretty nice community that I enjoyed, and there was one user in particular that I found interesting. He went by Classic Kyle, and his reviews were incredibly well written. No clue why he was on such a small website. But he did write a review of The Greatest Generation. He gave it a modest 7 out of 10, but the contents of this write-up is quite interesting. He would often weave in some personal anecdotes into his reviews, but here most of it is exactly that. Kyle explains that this record came into his life when he was singing the working class blues, a time where he was getting nowhere. Now, as I've discussed, this album is pretty depressive. It's not happy. Certain moments are synced into that mindset, but Kyle here wanted to be better than what Soupy was singing about, and he apparently did. His dead-end job was behind him, and he met a woman who supported him. Kyle also described this album as wallowing, and to be honest, I can agree. This record is wallowing in its sadness, but our writer here also said that it mattered to him at one time, that time when he was wallowing. To me, pop punk and emo always have a sense of catharsis, whether it's through pure energy or the lyrics. There's a reason this stuff appeals to such a young audience. It validates them. But one day you grow past it. Kyle did, and I'm more than sure Soupy did too. But then there's me. I heard this album mere months ago. I am almost 20. I am not depressed. I love this album for its high energy, soaring choruses, and cutting lyrics. I might not relate to them, but I feel it. Like our friend Kyle said, listening to The Greatest Generation is like reading a truly great book, and I couldn't agree more. This album has a broken yet mature tone to it that has helped it age pretty damn well, and because of that tone, I could see this album sticking by my side for a long time. Adulthood is ahead of me, and who knows what will happen. I mean, hopefully I won't end up in the same wallowing state this album finds itself in, and even if I do, I can be better than that. But if for whatever reason I need that catharsis, I'll know just where to look.
It was like the Waffle House Admiral's Feast. The Waffle Feast.
Is that bird shit?
That is bird shit.